Welcome to the Well Workplaces podcast. I'm Tom Bosner, your host, and today I'm joined by Reis Paluso. Now, a little bit about Reis, just as a bit of a background. Now, he's from summiting mountains in sub-zero temperatures wearing only shorts to better handling the daily stress of being a father and also being an entrepreneur. Breathwork has been the catalyst for Reis to find his inner strength and hone in on his passions. And by sharing progressive yet simple practices to help upgrade one's life, Reis is focused on bringing a multidisciplinary approach to breathing where individuals are empowered to build their own self-regulation toolkit, if you will. Reis is the co-founder and CEO of Our Breath Collective, which is a global community of breathers. And I'm really excited to chat with Reis today about all things breathwork. Welcome, Reis, to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Tom. Pleasure to be here. Excited to chat and share and explore all these great things.
Thanks, Reis. Yeah, well, I also thank you as well because you've literally just put the kids to bed, and it's 8 o'clock where Reis is over in. Was it San Diego? Was it?
Yeah, San Diego, California.
I absolutely love it. Great effort in getting the kids down. If that was me, I'd probably be all over the shop. But you look cool and calm there, mate. So that's great.
Yeah.
Now, Reis, probably what would be really interesting, I think, as a starting point, just to get to know you a little bit more on today's chat, is tell us. A really good question is, how did you get into breath work? Where did it all start for you, and how did you find yourself in this space? Because it is a nice niche, really.
Yeah, it's a great question, and really for me, was growing up in California, a surfer, and surfing has always been my way of taking care of myself in many different ways. Obviously the physicality of surfing, and then just mentally it was kind of a place where I could go and just be alone or with some friends and just being in nature and soaking that all up. And as I was building a different business, social media marketing agency, and I grew with two young daughters, as you know, that all starts to change your life with responsibilities, and surfing became really at the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak. And was just kind of looking for something to help with the stress and the anxiety and all the worries and just the mental chatter and all the things that go on within that. So I heard Wim Hof on a podcast, and that was really the catalyst for just exploring. And I did one breathing session, actually guided by a friend of mine who at the time I didn't really know he was into breath work, but upon finding out, he guided me in a breathing session, and that really just, it changed everything for me. I had never experienced or felt that way on my own, especially. Like, all I was doing was just changing my breath and following that, and the way that I had felt just it blew my mind. And I was like, whoa, what just happened? Like, I gotta figure this out. And so my path really started on my own self-discovery of diving into the practice, really getting into the Wim Hof method. Like you said in the intro, I went to Poland and climbed climbed mountains in just my shorts at really cold temperatures, and doing deep breathing sessions, and really that kind of helped my own transformation, and really just reconnecting with my own nature of what is built in here, and getting in touch with all this power that we all have access to. We're just never really taught about it. And from there, wanted to start teaching it. And so I have been teaching breath work, and started with the Wim Hof method, but now have sort of progressed into a more multidisciplinary approach, where really looking at the principles of breathing and how that is connected to all the different methods and techniques out there. And then how do we use those principles to be able to help someone with whatever it is that they're dealing with, whether it's stress, anxiety, focus, performance, any other health issues. Like, I mean, there's just so many things. Our breath is connected to really all of these things that are going on in our bodies. And so being able to work with people a little bit more directly and a little more intentionally, rather than trying to fit them into a box of like, hey, this method or technique works for everyone. It's like, no, we're all different in our nervous systems and our makeup and all these things that have happened to us in our lives. And so being able to work with people more specifically is really what I'm focused on. So yeah, that's kind of where it all came from. And since really getting into sharing and teaching this, I've since moved away from my agency and been just focusing on this because I see the impact that it's had on not only myself, but all the people that I've worked with, and where mental health is going, and with all the things going on in the world that are just like adding up, piling up on us. I think these tools are just a way to really awaken to our own ability to regulate our bodies, our nervous systems, our minds, all of these things. And it's like taking the power back. So I love seeing that in people. And once they realize that they have this tool that's happening all the time and they can use it to their advantage, it's really a beautiful process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great story. And I love I've got a lot of friends that are surfers, and you can tell as soon as you take that away, or, just that example, as soon as you take it away, because it's more than exercise, it's an escape. There's almost some mindfulness elements to it. There's the cold exposure, aspects, and no doubt the breath work is kind of integrated into surfing in the, getting under a wave. You have to hold your breath, and there's a bit of a flow to the whole thing, isn't it? So it's kind of interesting when you gave that example, because I think a lot of people do have the things, their hobbies, or their things that they do that self-regulates them in a way. It keeps them in check. And then things change in life. You have kids, or maybe there's a life event that occurs. And if you don't have those, what we sometimes refer to as well-being anchors, they get removed, then, you're left in your own head. And that can be maybe not a good place for some people.
Definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting how you ended up.
It's wild how we do that to ourselves. Like, we put our own health at the very last priority, and here we are trying to take care of little kids, and let alone all the other things we have going on, but we're not taking care of ourselves. Like, it's just weird how we do that. I find it fascinating that we all have that tendency, and for whatever reason we think it's selfish to take care of ourselves. And yeah, it kind of blows my mind a little bit. But yeah, it's like you take away those things and then you start going a little batty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it. And it's really great that you've set up Our Breath Collective, just as a way of connecting a lot of people, not only in the States, but globally, and sharing guided breath sessions and workshops and trainings, etc. It's really, really great that you've put that together, because as you've said a couple of times, it's a really simple way to look after yourself. It's free, and it really down regulates you from what we've talked about on the podcast in previous episodes, which is that fight or flight response, and finding a way to bring yourself down into a more calmer state. Reis, with some of the listeners in our community, a lot of them are corporates, and I often refer to them as corporate athletes. They're the people that, in going back maybe 5 years, they were the ones going to work every day in an office, probably working at a fairly consistent pace, and also probably juggling a lot of things. And the world's changed a lot in the last couple of years. And there's been a huge well-being focus for employees and employers as well. They've been looking at how do we bring well-being into the frame, so that employers can start to look after themselves, but also have a good strategy holistically for the organization. Why I love breathwork and why I love bringing you on today's show is to share a little bit more about the not only the benefits, but also how it can impact our performance as well. Because I think a lot of us naturally we want to be good at our roles, we want to be good at our jobs, but we also want to show up at home and be our best selves and be present as well. So Reis, I'm wondering maybe as a starting point for today, it'd be great to talk around. Have you got anything to share around the science of breathing and how it all works and how it can, I guess, downregulate the system, the whole central nervous system?
Yeah, I appreciate the question about the science, because I think that's one of the beauties of breathing. It can be feel a little woo woo, where it's like, oh, you're breathing and you're doing all these things, and it seems a little fringe, like out of the box, but really we're breathing all the time, right? It's the first thing we do when we enter this world, and it's the last thing we do before we leave, and we breathe 600 million to a billion times in our life. And
Wow.
it's this fundamental aspect of being alive, and we're not really ever taught, outside of maybe some basic biology class in school. We're not really taught about how it impacts literally every single system in our body. And what we're seeing now is that science is really coming into the breath community and exploring these things, because we're seeing the impact of and the benefits that it's having on people. And so it's really a special time, because we're learning more and more about how different rhythms and cadences and styles of breathing are doing all these different things. And really, I think one of the interesting things to talk about in this context of, in the workplace, is really where we think about work and stress. And stress is just, it's just a natural part of like being in the work environment, right? And the downstream effects of stress show up in mental health, from anxiety to even into our physical body, where certain things start shutting down, or we have different symptoms coming through physiologically in our bodies. And it's this constant stress that we're under, and it's this chronic stress, really. And when we look at something like breathing, we're actually using it as a controlled stressor. So if you think about, in particular, the Wim Hof style of breathing, like we're cyclically hyperventilating, consciously moving the breath in a faster pattern, where we're actually taking our system into more of a sympathetic charge, but we're doing that under our own volition, right? So it's different than a stressor coming from the outside and putting us in a stressful state. We're actually doing that. So it's this ability for us to consciously practice being in a stressful type environment internally. And so it gives us this opportunity to really see how we respond and what our tendencies are. And it also gives us a little bit more space where we can like build this capacity for ourselves to be able to maneuver and be more fluid when we're feeling stress. And then on the flip side, we can also use the breath, as you said, to downregulate, so when you do feel that stress coming on, it's like, oh, okay, wow, I'm familiar with how my body is responding. Maybe your heart rate starts going, or your breath changes into a different part of your body. Then you become aware of that, and then you can actually use the breath as a tool to start to slow yourself down. And so when we look at the breath, there's really kind of four things that I like to start with. Is the speed of our breath. Are we breathing fast, or are we breathing slow? I think it's pretty obvious what happens when you breathe fast. You go into more of a sympathetic state, more arousal, right? Your heart rate goes up, your breath rate is changing. It's going up with that. And then a slower breath is going to calm you down. It's like you hear this thing like, oh, just take a deep breath, and so that, what do you think about? Right, that slow exhale. We also look at the location of our breath, so our chest versus our belly. When you think about when you're stressed, you're generally breathing up here. It's like you're sort of stuck up here, and so that's going to be more of that sympathetic style of breath. If we can move the breath down low into our belly and breathe more, as they would say, diaphragmatically. Really every breath is using our diaphragm, but it's more the location of the breath. That's going to be more parasympathetic. Our inhale versus our exhale. So our inhale, when we're focused on breathing on an inhale, so like, like when you're feeling stressed out, that it's normally you're focused on that inhale, it's going to be, again, sympathetic. Whereas focus on the exhale, going to be more parasympathetic, slow you down. And then our nose versus our mouth. And this is a really interesting one that science has been looking more and more into. And there was a great book that came out last year called Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor. And he does a really fascinating self-experiment on breathing through his nose versus breathing through his mouth. And what we find is that when we breathe through our mouth, we have this tendency to over breathe. So we're breathing faster. We're actually dumping more carbon dioxide. And the downstream effect on that is pretty detrimental to our system. Whereas if we actually breathe through our nose, it's a smaller orifice, which is going to slow our breath down. It's going to actually bring our breath lower into our body. And then we have this incredible filtration system in our nasal passage. If you put your fist up to your nose or up to your face, that's about as big as this whole nasal passage is. And so it's got all these twists and turns and turbinates and hair and mucous membrane. And so it's actually filtering all of that. And that obviously has a great impact on the air that we're actually breathing and getting into our system. So kind of a little bit of a all over the place tangent there, but I like to just kind of present those four key elements because it's really easy for people to understand, okay, how am I breathing? What pathway is it coming in? Is it coming through my nose or my mouth? Is it in my chest or my belly? Is it fast or is it slow? Is it, am I focused on the inhale or the exhale? And then you have like these little ingredients that you can start to piece together and play with it and see how you can just very simply begin to change your state and self-regulate. And breathing is very simple in a sense of like it's an inhale and an exhale, but it also has this very deep complexity within our bodies and all the different systems and then how we can actually start to play with it, all the different knobs and levers. And so it's a pretty fascinating process to be able to figure out what's going to work for you. And that's really what I'm all about. I want to help people understand, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. And this is how I can use my breath to either change my state or to achieve my goals or to relieve some symptoms that I'm feeling in my health. So I think that goes within this whole context of in the workplace is, we're trying to be focused. We're trying to perform at a higher level. We're trying to be able to do our best within all of that and maintain this level of ability to do those things in a very stressful environment. So our breath is a great way to be able to train all of these different things and to be able to understand ourselves a lot deeper. So
yeah, Reis, thanks for sharing the science there. Those four checkpoints are so helpful. I've never really thought of it in that way before, believe it or not, because it sounds, when you said it to me, I was like, oh, that sounds really simple. I never really thought of it in that way, but really interesting how that would affect your physiology. And I've noted that not only for, I guess, the people that are working and, trying to do the day-to-day and manage the juggle of working and home life, I've also noticed in the space of professional sports and athletes that a lot of athletes are now getting into this space where they're doing breath work to manage themselves while they're under that stressful state.
Hmm.
It was probably the one that was noticeable for me. I'm not a big UFC fan, but there's a guy from New Zealand who's talked a little bit about it. He's in the he's in the last round or something, and you can see him. There's a little clip of him, and he's really down. I think he's doing some work there just to bring himself down, and he looks so calm in the most stressful part of the fight, and he went on to win. I'm not saying that's why he did, but it was a really good live example of that fight as an analogy for the day to day
Yeah,
of how you could bring it into how someone could bring that into their world and practice it and make, I guess, try and perfect it for them.
totally.
I
Yeah,
really
and athletes like that are tapping into all different things within the breath, and really, I know exactly the example you're talking about, and very focused on nasal breathing. Also really focused on this idea of carbon dioxide tolerance, and one of the things that I don't think most people really understand. We hear so much about oxygen, right? Like, oh, oxygenate the blood and all of these things, but really, within the stress of life and how that our breath responds to that is generally we're breathing fast, right? We're over breathing, so that means we're dumping carbon dioxide. We're Our carbon dioxide and oxygen levels are sort of skewed, and what most people don't really realize is that in order for us to get the maximum amount of oxygen to be diffused into our cells to be then used for energy, we actually need carbon dioxide present. So we need to build tolerance to have more carbon dioxide in our system so that we can then be more efficient with the oxygen that we have available. So it's like, just because you're breathing in a lot, right? We don't that oxygen is just moving through our bodies and not actually getting used until there's enough CO2 to say, oh, okay, now you can let that oxygen off of the red blood cell into our cells to then be used for energy. And so that's a big piece of what those guys are working on, is being able to have higher carbon dioxide tolerance, thinking about being in a hold, but that
mm,
also impacts us not in that, in the octagon or whatever.
yeah.
We all can benefit from doing the same things. And carbon dioxide tolerance is a great opportunity to build, again, stress resiliency, right? CO2 is what creates the trigger for us to breathe in our brain. So if we have a higher level of CO2 tolerance, then we can actually bring our breath rate down, and we can be more efficient. We can have more energy. We can use that oxygen that we have available. So it's sort of one of these things that it doesn't quite make sense until you actually hear it, and again, not something we're ever really taught.
Yeah, that's right. It's in some schools here, like primary schools or kindergartens now in Australia. They're learning a little bit about mindfulness. My daughter comes home and tells me all about it, which is great. And incorporated in that, I believe, is some breath not training, but it's just basically learning how to do some deep breaths when they're in their 2 o'clock 2 p.m. stage of their day. So
Yeah.
that's kind of maybe a nice little start, but it's obviously there's a lot of work to be done to really bring out and focus on breath work as opposed to meditation or mindfulness. um,
Yeah, and
Reese,
I mean, on that note, like,
mm,
meditation's hard, it's hard for a lot of people. And with breathing, it's like, it's high impact, low effort, right? Literally, you can do like 10 breaths and you're like, whoa, I feel totally different. um we can also Breath work can also be a great, like, gateway into meditation. When you start having a breath practice, you can actually bring yourself into that same very calm, quiet mindset a lot quicker, and then you can do your meditation, and you drop in way faster. And I've had a lot of people that I've worked with who are like, oh, I can't meditate, and then they start doing breath work, and then like, oh wow, like I can get into this a lot quicker. You're not going through that struggle of like, the monkey mind just going wild, and you can really drop into that space a lot quicker. Again, part of our physiology and how our body responds to the different levels of CO2 and oxygen in our system. We get vasoconstriction in our brain, prefrontal cortex. It slows all that thinking, monkey mind down. And so it's awesome that your daughter's getting exposed to that now. I mean, gosh, I can't even imagine when our kids are, the older, 20 years old, what that whole scene and world is going to look like, and the information that's going to be available to them is going to be incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely had some good runs with meditation, especially throughout the last couple of years. But I've more focused recently on cold exposure for myself. And I actually love that you said the monkey mind versus just focusing on your breathing. It's just a lot easier, and it's a bit more practical for me anyway. I found that, like, the contrast to be just, oh, okay, this is easy. I just need to do this a couple of things instead of trying to think too much or get caught up in my thoughts too much. I'm wondering there, I sort of touched on cold exposure, and we've mentioned Wim Hof, and you've done the training, of course. You've also climbed some mountains wearing shorts, right? So there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of this to touch on in this discussion. So the cold exposure, is that different to breath work, or are we talking about two different modalities to self-regulate here, or are we bunching them all together?
Yeah, it's two different modalities, but they actually combine really nicely. And, I think that's partly because that's the Wim Hof method, and Wim's done such a great job in bringing those two together to the forefront. But breathing and cold, they do work very symbiotically. When we do the breath work before we go into the cold, it actually primes our body. And then really, once you get into the cold, it's really all about your breath, as you, I'm sure, have experienced, whether it's an ice bath or a cold shower, or just being outside in the cold. And your breath is immediately becomes illuminated in the whole thing. Like, you get into an ice bath, your breath gets taken away. It's like, you're like, kind of lose your breath, and then you start to gain it back and slow it down. And then you get to this place where you're like, oh, okay, I can actually be here. And so it's that same tool, going from this high arousal state. You get into a very shockingly cold environment. Your body is like, get me out of here. And you're like, nope, I'm going to be here. And you slow your breath down. And then you eventually get to that state where you're like, oh, okay, so it is that down regulating tool within that experience. And, but yeah, they're different practices. They don't have to be combined. But again, they work really well. And then the breath obviously being the tool to help you down regulate a little bit quicker within getting into the cold. So, but yeah, I love them both. They're both amazing. And again, very similar controlled stressor. You're getting into a very acute, short-term stressful situation. It illuminates a lot of things for you. We kind of always say the ice bath is the mirror for life, right? It shows us how we respond and how we react and what our tendencies are. And really, it just like brings us into the moment. Like, there's no time to be out thinking about other things. You're just like, you're in this experience because it's so potent. And the beauty of it is, I think it shows us our potential. It shows us what's possible. because we can get in a big bucket of ice water and be in there for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we get out and we have, this adrenaline release and this dopamine, happy hormones that are making us feel really good, and it's like we did something really hard for the day, and then everything else comes a little bit easier. I think we're all, thanks to modern life, we're all creatures of leisure and creatures of comfort, and we've gotten too comfortable, and we need to actually use some of these tools like breath work and cold exposure to give ourselves little doses of stress and discomfort in a very positive and intentional way, so that we just get stronger. It's strengthening all of the systems in our body simultaneously. So
there's also some good stuff around, or some good studies around, just looking at longevity as well. And one of the things they talk about is that cold exposure as a way of, I guess, just triggering a little bit of stress. Because you're right, we're so comfortable in our lives, and it's kind of gets to the point where it's, I've got to have the heater on in my house because I'm a little, it's not a, it's 18 degrees instead of 20 degrees. It's just gets a little bit ridiculous like
yeah,
that. And I think for people as well that are going through the day to day, and maybe they're in a in a space where they are in their world and they're not quite happy, something like this can be quite nice just to try something new. And you'll be pleased, Reis, to know that there's a little movement in Melbourne where I am, called Cold and Conscious, and they're meeting on different beaches around,
amazing.
doing breath work, and then into the ice bath, or the cold exposure, the blow up ones on the beach. Really
Yeah.
cool. They look like they're having a great time, and they've got some great resources on for people as to, gee, is this for me, kind of thing. Reese, I was going to ask you, with cold exposure or breath work or ice baths, those types of things, if someone would be interested in making a start, where do you normally go? Like, we've mentioned Wim Hof, but like, what do you normally sort of get people to start with if they're really interested in this space?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of resources out there available for people looking to get into breath work. I mean, you can definitely check out our Breath Collective. That's really what
Mm,
we're focused on. We It really kind of came about as I was teaching workshops and other, educational experiences for people, and my partners as well. People were like, "Oh, I love this. This is great. How do I build a practice? How do I be consistent?" So that's kind of where it started, was like, "Hey, we're already doing our own practice. Let's just start sharing it." So we lead daily breath practices every morning. They're all about 15 minutes long. So it's like these short little doses just to get your day going, or maybe you need it later in the day. We've got an on-demand library, so if you can't watch it live, there's you can tune in at any time, and so it's just an opportunity to start building some consistency. With that consistency comes more awareness into our bodies, more awareness into all the things that we've been talking about. And then we also bring in workshops. We have different experts in the field who come in and teach. We have a course that we call the Breathwork Intensive, which really gets into all the science that we've touched on as well. I mean, definitely a lot deeper. We look at the physiology, we look at the mechanics of how we're breathing, how we can actually optimize and enhance our breath movement. And then we look at our nervous system and how that is related to all those other parts. We also have a teacher training. So really anything breath work, people can check out our Breath Collective. For cold exposure, there's not necessarily, I think, a resource that is like, here's how to do it.
mm,
But there's definitely a lot of great places to go and get information. If you've ever listened to the Huberman Lab podcast, Andrew Huberman, he talks about cold exposure. I think a few weeks ago he had a great episode where he talked all about it. I actually just did a video with a brand called Mudwater out here in California, and they They have like a coffee alternative drink, but we shot a little how-to video, so I'll have to share that with you. You can include that in the show notes, but kind of runs people through how to approach the cold. But really on a very simple level, like just start with a shower. We
Mm.
don't, it doesn't have to be this extreme thing. You don't need to go and buy a bunch of ice. You don't need to, get a whole setup. You can really just use your cold shower, or even better, if you are somewhere where you have a natural body of water that is, you know, cold. Not, it doesn't even need to be freezing, just cold enough to give you a stimulus. Like the ocean in Melbourne, I'm sure, is perfectly fine for that. I love anytime I can find a little cold in nature. That's always my favorite. But just start small. Go in the shower, take your normal warm shower, and then when you're ready, before you're about to get out, turn that heat off and feel the cold water, and just watch how your body responds. Watch where your breath does, watch where the tension comes in, and then just try to use your breath and relax, and just start small. Go 30 seconds and then build your way up to a minute, and then build your way up from there. And it's not about going in and being in there for 5 or 10 minutes, or being like Wim Hof and going in for like 2 hours. It's really about 2 minutes is kind of where we see like the positive benefits that we're getting. And really anything beyond that really becomes like this mental aspect, which, is great for some people and some things. And it's just depending on your goals. But I think a
Mm.
cold shower is a great place to start, and just build it up slowly from there. You don't need to push ourselves too far. It's like if we have one really bad experience, it's going to take us a lot of positive experiences to get back there. So just building
Mm.
that comfort zone one step at a time. And yeah, so that would be my encouragement.
Yeah, thanks, Reese. That's really great advice. And one thing that's pretty standard or pretty common in Australia anyways, there's lots of surf life-saving clubs all along
Yeah.
the different coasts. What you see even in winter, where we live, or close to where I live in Melbourne, is there's a bunch of older people, and every morning without fail on a Sunday, they're out swimming. So they're doing laps in the ocean, and it's freezing cold, but I've seen them there. It's like a swimming club in the ocean, basically, or that it's not for older people, but it just seems to bring all these older people together. And they get out of the water, and you've never seen a happier bunch of people. And I've always looked at them, and I'm like, they're onto something. I don't know what it is, and you see them all throughout Australia, at the different surf life saving clubs, all those areas, always out for that morning swim in winter, in spring. It doesn't matter what season it is, they're out there, and
Yeah.
they just look like the happiest people you've ever seen. So there's no secret as to why, but it's kind of nice. It's really nice to hear from you as to all the ins and outs and the physiology. It starts to make sense as you're explaining it. It's
Yeah.
really, really cool.
Yeah, it's awesome that, I mean, I feel like there's those types of communities everywhere, right? Where they've just
Yeah,
been tapped in for a long time, and they probably couldn't even tell you all the things that it's happening. They just know it makes them feel good, and
yeah,
it's keeping them young and healthy and vibrant. And I mean, that's what it's all about, right? Like I feel like a lot of times we get stuck in our head and we need to know the why and the how and all the things and all the science, but it's like, no, just go experience it. Just feel it for yourself. And if it feels good, then keep going. And really that's always my encouragement, is just like play and have fun and explore. And we tend to take things so seriously in life, and it doesn't need to be serious all the time. Like my kids, I have an ice bath set up in my backyard, and for my kids it's like a game. They're just
yeah,
like
yeah.
playing, and they're just like, and they don't have all these like limiting beliefs and preconceived thoughts about what it means in the cold and all that. They're just like, yeah, it's fun and it's silly, and so it's like we got to bring out the kid in us, and be curious and explore and play, and see where that takes us, because I think that's really what we're missing. We're so stuck on like having to have the answers and having to do the right thing, and we want to know the quick and easy down and dirty way. And it's like, sometimes we got to figure that out for ourselves. But luckily there is science, and there is these incredible people out there who are doing these things and showing us great tools, and it's up to us to just tap into that and grab the bull by the horns and do it. And once you do, you're going to start feeling a lot better. I can guarantee that.
Yeah, Reese, that's such a great summary of exploring it all and getting back to our I guess our childish sort of selves in exploring all this and having a go. I couldn't agree more. People are too stressed and worried about all the finer detail, and they're missing the experience sometimes as well. So, Reese, I think this has been an amazing chat, and you've actually shared a lot of science in there, and also all the benefits as well. So I'd love to thank you for joining us today on the podcast, and we'll be sure to be adding all the bits of information for Our Breath Collective in the show notes for those that are interested in connecting with you away from this show. But thanks, Reese, so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it so much. It's great to be here and share. And to everyone listening, I just encourage you to just get curious and just try it. I mean, what do you got? What do you got to lose, right? And that's kind of what it was for me. I heard someone that inspired me, and I was just like, yeah, I got to check this out. And then one thing led to another, and it's totally transformed my entire life. So, I can't say that will be the way for everyone, but I think if you try enough things and are open to experience more of life, then something's going to hit you that's going to be like, wow, this is amazing, and this is for me. And I hope that everyone can find that. And maybe the breath and getting into the cold might create a little stimulate a little more of that drive to find that. So
love it. Absolutely love it.
Time. Yeah.
No, thank you. Have a good night, and yeah, we'll take care, mate.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you.
See ya.